Tom Marazzo, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me back.
Of course, of course. And this time is a little different because we're not talking about some in the news topic or something like that. I mean, this
Mhm,
is this is stuff that's in the news right now. But I find this really interesting
mhm,
because you're famous around Canada. A lot of people know who you are because of several different things. Your involvement with the convoy, your involvement recently with the National Citizens Inquiry, which I had you on the show
mhm.
recently for. But what people don't realize is you're a teacher. You're a teacher, and well, tell us about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, so I was a teacher,
Okay, you
and,
were a teacher.
until I got fired for not participating in medical experiments.
Right.
Um, but when I was teaching, I was actually teaching, uh I was a software teacher, and, I you know what? I taught at the college system here in Ontario, and, the funny thing is this, you would think that there would be, like, this standard, right? But there's actually not in the colleges. I basically was told, these are the classes you're going to teach. Go ahead. And then sometimes I'd say, hey, is there any like textbook to this or any material? They're like, no, 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 that's your problem. Right. So like I would find, and because I was a part-time teacher trying to get on full time, I never said no to any class. So
Right.
they're like, okay, in 3 days, you're teaching, you know, Android. I'm like, okay. Basically, I got 3 days to learn how to do an Android app, right?
Right.
So I taught everything that they would throw at me. So for the 2 years, like I taught ASP.NET, I taught um, Android, I taught iOS, I taught a lot of C++, C sharp, you name it. But the college I was at started a 1 year post grad certificate in artificial intelligence. And so I was interested in it because when I did my undergrad in software, I actually had this passion for computer vision, like fell in love with it. And when I was teaching, I had this strange opportunity that I could start a club, and we were going to develop software to make these already pre-existing electric vehicles that previous students years past had built. And I kind of come up with this proposal, and I said, hey, I've done a lot of computer vision in my undergrad in software, and I'm wondering if you would allow me to start a club where we could convert those electric vehicles into autonomous vehicles.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, so the school's like, yeah, absolutely, because they had a really strong relationship with Honda Canada, and there was a lot of research and innovation. The school completely supported it. They were giving me resources, giving me access to different faculties, because I didn't want just the students coming from the software side. I wanted the mechanical engineer students. I wanted the electrical ones, because I wanted this to be a multidisciplinary project. And things were going great. I actually had my first meeting with all the students that wanted to participate in this. And as I came out of the meeting, that was the day I found out about the first COVID lockdown.
Mm.
And so I came out of the meeting where the first meeting we had to build this autonomous car. And I found out, yeah, 2 days we're locking down. And that completely killed the entire project altogether because I need access to the vehicles. But the AI program still started, and actually, it started when we were teaching remotely. And so when they were handing out the list, they said, okay, Tom, we've identified you to teach inside the AI program as well as the others. Go through the list of courses you want to teach, and then we'll kind of negotiate from there which ones based on the other part-time teachers. So I went through the list, and I really wanted to teach computer vision because I've done computer vision in both C++ and also in Python. And I just loved it. Like I really like computer vision. And they actually didn't give me that one. They said, okay, no, you've got to teach. Of course, it's college, right? So they're not going to give me something I know a lot about, right? So I ended up. They said you're going to teach machine learning, and so I taught machine learning. and I was simultaneously teaching this course called Issues and Challenges with AI. But basically, to me, it was like, okay, if I've got free reign to create this course, it's going to be a really the ethics of AI.
Oh, that's
And so
crazy.
that's how I approached it. Yeah, so that's how I approached it. So I built the course. And I think of most of the courses that I taught, that was probably the most enjoyable. And strangely enough, that was one that was very well attended too, because it was just an opportunity for all of us to sit around and talk about these. I'd have a weekly theme, and we would sit around in the Zoom call or whatever it was at the time we were using, I think Teams, and we would just talk about all the issues that surround AI in that particular theme, right? And I started the course off actually talking about what is ethics itself. So, and the reason I had to do that was because I had a lot of international students.
Hmm.
So I had to get
Oh, so people
a
had
common understanding.
different sort of
Yeah.
concepts of morality and
Yes.
ethics
Yes.
already as it was. No, it's funny because AI
Absolutely.
is really big in the news right now. It's a lot of people are talking
Yes.
about it. A lot of people are pontificating about where it's going to go, but not a lot of people are
Mhm.
talking about this. They're not talking about the ethics behind it,
Mhm.
even the question, should we be doing it, like, or maybe should we be slowing down on it, maybe we should, pump the brakes, or are other people not going to pump the brakes, so we need to rush into it? Like, where do you even
Well,
start
that
with that?
yeah, and so I think the place to start with that is to be more specific about what AI is,
Okay.
right? As an example, people don't understand that, like, your toaster, the thermostat on your house, that in itself is a form of AI, which we would term dumb AI. Okay. So to say that we're going to just walk away from AI altogether is not really a practical thing given society's level of technology right now.
Now, you calling it
But
AI because it's just an automated thing that just goes on and off. It switches, it
yeah,
does it all
yes.
by itself, and you don't have to worry
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, which is another interesting thing, because a lot of times people look at automation and they say that automation is this AI that's coming to take your job. And I hate to say it, but automation has been around for decades,
Hmm.
right? It is not the same thing as what people traditionally believe as artificial intelligence. Now, there is a lot of artificial intelligence in automation right now, because if you look at these, what are they? No, that's I was going to say Omar Bradley, but he was a general in World War II. I think Alan Bradley is a pick and place, robot,
Okay.
a multi-axis robot that picks something up, drops it off, and just continues to do pick and place.
Hmm.
Traditionally, when you see videos of car factories with the robot arm, that's a pick and place kind of a robot. Okay. That often uses computer vision. Okay. So there are a lot of components within automation that really take from AI, but specifically it's more geared towards computer vision. Now, what is computer vision? Computer vision is a subset. So AI is like an umbrella, right?
Hmm.
And underneath that umbrella, you've got computer vision, you've got machine learning, you have neural networks. You've got very different disciplines. It's almost like saying, okay, you're a medical doctor, right? And then there's all these different specialties. And that's kind of the world of AI right now. And language
So
processing,
just to slow
chat
down, because
GBT.
like not
Yeah.
everybody in this is gonna get all of the concepts of
Mhm.
this. Like
Right.
like my immediate reaction to automation is seeing, because I grew up in Motor City, so
Mhm.
plants, factories where they've replaced workers by having a machine that's an arm that grabs a door or something, and spot welders hit it, and
Yes.
it improves efficiency, as opposed to all the laborers that would have to be there, and the whole
Right.
fear there is that jobs were taken. Now,
Mhm.
traditionally, jobs were all when the jobs were taken by automation, it was all just single motion tasks or something like that that could
Yes.
replace a trade worker or a blue collar
Mhm.
worker. I think today we're seeing replacement in a different realm because of the difference in what this automation is doing. Like, for example, a machine that moves a thing, it's just doing a simple task all day long. There's no real intelligence there to that.
Right.
That's just a
Right.
series of motions and actions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's
AI's
just a bunch of if else statements. If this happens, do this, right?
right. Now AI is
That's
different
not
than that, right? Like what we're
it's
what we're
very
talking about today.
yes. Yeah, it's very different than that, right? The big difference is, what you described with the single task type of automation. That is something that a programmer is going to write conditions to. It's like, if this happens, do this,
Hmm.
right? It's if either this or that. Like, there's
Or even
a
complex
very
ones like
specific.
a CNC machine that makes a complex part. I mean,
Yes.
it's still there's no mind behind that. It's just a bunch of
No.
cues and it does the actions.
It's very rule based. That's the reality of it. It's a rule. Like, it's following a recipe. That's all it's actually doing, right? There's no learning, okay? And we'll get into the learning piece in a minute, but when you talk about jobs, the the economic sort of theory behind all of this is that for every job that you're losing of somebody standing there on an assembly line doing this mundane, mind-numbing job, you're replacing that job, but you're creating a different job somewhere else where somebody is a technician that can maybe perhaps repair that robot.
Hmm.
Okay. So there's offsets to doing this. It's just really what the scale of the offset is. And I mean, people were terrified years ago. When I was a kid, I still had a bank book. Okay, but people were terrified when the bank machines came in because they thought it was going to replace tellers everywhere, right? But the reality was is that the the intent of that was to replace the mundane tasks of the tellers and then make the tellers more specialized in a way that helps the customer with more complicated requests. Okay, but
Hmm.
you didn't need to consume a teller's time doing simple transactions, depositing or withdrawing money. So that's kind of the sort of theory behind that. But at the same time, it created an industry of bank machines and technicians and engineers and stuff that all created those things and maintain them.
Hmm.
Right. So there is again that trade-off
Well, we can go back even
theoretically.
further, right, and look at
Mhm.
the industrial revolution in agriculture. I mean, 80% of the
Mhm.
population at one time worked in agriculture, and
Yes.
then they mechanized it. And when it was mechanized, boy, did that
Mhm.
change the demographics and where people worked. And there was a lot of fear at the time, like there's going to be a bunch of useless people that don't have jobs, and that didn't pan out. That's not how it actually went.
No, it's not how it went. And like, I give you a great example about this blue collar or white collar, whatever you want to call it, like techie collar. Okay. I actually did when I was in school for my undergrad in software, I did a co-op with an automation company.
Mhm.
And one of the co-founders of the company, he was a millwright. Okay. Like, that's what his trade was. He was a licensed millwright.
Yeah.
And these guys are like amazing. I have so much respect for millwrights, and I think to do it all over again, I might have actually considered doing that.
It's a good job.
Um, it's a great job, and if you're a handy person and you like to do things yourself, that's the career to honestly consider. But you know this there has to be a distinction, though, between automation and the world of artificial intelligence. Okay. Like, the reason I got interested in working for this automation company is because I thought I was going to get to do computer vision software and
Mhm.
write all this software. Well, no, it's a different style of programming altogether. You use ladder logic, and you basically get these robots that come with their own software platforms, and you're barely programming in the traditional sense inside these platforms. A lot of the stuff is already pre-canned for you. So for a guy like me who was a software developer, I was pretty disappointed trying to go down that path. But
Mm.
I'm glad I did because it opened me up to the difference between automation and the world of artificial intelligence. I'll be honest with you. I'm not. I do have honest to God concerns about the future of some serious artificial intelligence. I really do have some real ethical issues and real concerns with it.
Well, what first
Which
first
is,
before we address any concerns, like what can we define intelligence as? So like if you're saying some forms of automation or essentially a type of intelligence, what would you call like artificial intelligence as people refer to it as?
well, here's the big difference. Okay, is that there's the perception, and I want to be very specific about this word. There's the perception that an artificial intelligence is learning. Okay, it's learning. Now you have to understand. Let's look at the domain of machine learning because I think people have probably heard the expression and may not understand what that means.
Okay.
But it's basically you're taking a large quantity of data and you're trying to make a prediction based on the data. Okay, so a great example of this would be real estate agents. Okay, you want to sell your house. So, what does a real estate agent do? They go into your neighborhood where you're trying to sell and they do comps. They compare your house to other houses in the neighborhood that sold at a certain price. And then they say, based on all the other comps in your area, a 3 bedroom, 2 bath garage, it sold for, you know, X millions of dollars because you're in the GTA and you're insane to live here, right?
Or anywhere in
And
Canada.
it's a
Holy
wartime
cow.
house. It's a wartime house for $4 million.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's crazy.
so the reality. So is the machine actually learning? Not really. What it's doing, it's based off of statistics. So a lot of artificial intelligence, it actually comes from the world of statistics and modeling to make predictions. That's why we do statistics, is to make informed decisions about the future.
Hmm.
So forget the idea of machine learning. Let's call it a prediction machine. Okay, that's the whole point. So to say that your 3 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 1 car garage house is going to sell in the GTA for $950,000. That's cheap, by the way. Um, in this specific neighborhood, well, let's set the price based at $950,000, right? Like you're predicting the future based on the past.
Mhm.
And so this is kind of where a lot of the more advanced, that's sort of the foundation of where a lot of the um, AI algorithms started to pop up. And there's actually a guy, he was a U of T professor here, Stinton, I believe his name, who's basically a pioneer in a lot of this artificial intelligence stuff. And for 30 years, he was kind of ostracized by his colleagues. And then he had some major breakthroughs in the world of AI. And now he's kind of a world renowned AI guy.
What caused the
And
ostracism for him?
well, because they didn't think that the path that he was going on, they was kind of the direction that they thought artificial intelligence was going to go.
Okay.
And he drew from a lot of statistical analysis and created algorithms. So here's the idea. If I say in automation, I say your task is to pick up this object and move it over here and drop it down, and then pick up this object, move it over here, drop it down. Like that is not machine learning. That is not an algorithm that had to learn from experience or repetition. Where this is the difference with artificial intelligence. It starts off with a large amount of data, a big data set, we call it. You feed that into the computer. And based on all of that and the algorithms that you write, what it'll do is it'll make a prediction about the future outcome. Uh, and then we'll see the truth. Okay, you'll prove it. So let's say I show this algorithm a picture of a baby. Okay. And this is how we train neural networks. We take this big data set, a bunch of pictures of babies, and then we run it through a neural network. And then we say to the computer, is this picture a baby? And you're showing it a cat. And
Right.
if it says no, right, it kind of gets rewarded. And I know that's you know, a peculiar term for an AI. It's basically validated. It's like, okay, is this all these pictures that we gave you of babies? Is the picture of the cat we just showed you a baby? And if it says no, well, then the algorithm is correct. It predicted that it's not a baby. It's
Mm.
actually, in fact, a cat. So then we go back and we say, hey, you were right. So based on your answer, we're going to reward you with the truth and say, okay, you were right. And that experience goes back into the data set. It becomes a loop. In neural networks, we call it forward and backward propagation. So you're predicting the future, you're validating whether it was true or false, and based on the answer, you it backward propagates and goes back into the data set. So it's this constant evolution where it's back and forth. It's comparing all the time of what the data is started out as, what you showed it, and what it compared it to. And then so it gives the perception that it's learning. Okay. And that's all based on
Is that just
statistics.
an illusion
And
though, or is it like is that
Um,
actually a
can I
process?
step
yeah, sure.
one sec?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of focus lately on Chat GPT, and
Mhm.
there are millions of people around the world that are getting and interacting with it, and a lot of people are getting somewhat of a false impression of it being able to actively learn, because as they are talking with the GPT, it
Mhm.
is recognizing the things that are being said to it and then evolving the course of dialogue uh, forward so that it can interact back and forth. Now,
Mhm.
tying into the backward and forward thing that Tom was saying earlier, um, the context window for GPT is limited. It can only retain so much of the current conversation before it starts hallucinating and saying all sorts of weird things. So,
Yeah.
like the base neural platform itself, it doesn't change. Every time you start a new instance, it's always starting at the same fresh point, and old conversations and stuff currently aren't being able to be pulled through unless you're going through a third party uh, really highly technical community that has a bunch of Python scripts and stuff to interject that context into the conversation for you. But
Mhm.
um, that isn't to say that it's fully closed off. There's
Mhm.
still feedback options that people have with these various large learning models where they can vote it up or down, or if, or even the researchers or companies behind them, they can look at the interactions people are having, rank them, sort them, filter them, and then use that information going forward to further fine tune their models. So, yeah, it learns, but it's after the fact, and you'll never know about it.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know what a great example is Tesla. Tesla is a great example because in the early days of Tesla, Tesla is based off of using computer vision. And you saw some of the other competitors, they were using LiDAR, which is light and radar. So it would basically shoot this invisible beam around its entire 3D environment. And it would create as the vehicle moves through with LiDAR, it creates a 3D space around the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the software starts to um, basically analyze all that data and say, okay, I don't want to bump into that. That appears to be a solid wall, right? Where Tesla took a different perspective. They said, we're going to do all of this with computer vision, and we're going to, based on the experience of every single car. So, you know, I'm 50 years old and I've been driving since I was 16. So that's a lot of, I can tell you, I've driven well over a million miles. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've been driving for quite a while. So based on my experience, like it took me all of those years to get that level of driving experience that I have, right? From learning, you know, driving the snow, driving the rain, driving a sunny day. Um, and I've learned how to do that just based on my experience as a human being. But what Tesla did is they said, you know what we're going to do is we're going to use cameras. We're not going to use LiDAR, but we're going to take all of the autonomous vehicles that we have out in the network, and they're going to do it all with computer vision. Now, all of that data, every single time that autonomous vehicle goes out into the world and drives, that data gets uploaded to Tesla's servers. That data, that experience gets loaded into their algorithms, and that joins the collective data set.
Hmm.
Okay, so one of the things like where some of the competitors said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a computer system sit beside a driver. I think Google wanted to do this. They're going to sit beside a driver and watch that driver in the environment that they're driving, and they're going to watch what the reaction is, the human driving the car, and that's how they're going to learn, by observation, by observing the environment with the reactions of the driver. So that's one approach that they took. But the thing with Tesla, what they did, which was really interesting to me, is the fact that, in 2019, I think Tesla sold 400,000 Teslas.
Yeah.
Okay. So if 400,000 Teslas were on the road using their autopilot for 1 hour a day, that's 400,000 hours of driving experience that gets uploaded into their servers. That's an incredible data set. In 1 hour,
That's
they can
big.
get more driving than my entire life, right? And that gets added to the collective learning, the data set,
Right. So this isn't
and then
like a
gets
chat GPT experience where it's reset after
yeah,
so many
right,
iterations, and then it goes back to its
right,
preset. Like this is constantly actually adding to the database, constantly
yes,
actually learning things. Now, but
hmm and it
getting back to a bit of the like the basics of the learning stuff. So this is
mhm.
it's it's picking up new information, it's adding it to the database. um
Mhm.
what point do the databases get too big, like, and then it just can't, is that just exponential and we have to just keep adding more and more to these server farms, or what, how does that work?
Well, there are limitations to the data, right? Depending on the use. So in machine learning, depending on the machine learning algorithm, I mean, there's several different types of machine learning, let's say, formulas that you can use. Okay, you have to sometimes clean up that data, because you could get these anomalies. So if I go back to the example of a real estate, let's say this 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, 1 car garage, for some reason, we don't know the circumstance, but sells for $100,000, and everybody else in the neighborhood selling for 950. Do we
Right.
keep that as part of our data? We have to eliminate that from the data set. And the same thing is if that same house sells for $4 million, right? Then we have to send in the no, I won't even touch that joke. I'm gonna leave that joke alone. Okay. But you know what I mean? We've got these outliers. This is all statistical language, right? We're trying
Right.
to just get that sort of average prediction.
What about
So
redundancies? Because I'm assuming if you have a lot of driving data, say for example in the Tesla incident or the Tesla example that you gave,
mhm.
you would have a lot of behavior that is exactly the same or almost exactly the same, and that would create a lot of redundancy in the data set. Would that be then something that you can expunge, or?
I don't really know that you would want to.
Okay.
um, because again, it's the collective. Because depending on the algorithm as well, now you're getting into weight factors. Like you're talking about probability of something happening, right?
Ah, I
So the
see.
more data that you can justify an outcome, the closer to 100% that you can get based on the large sample of data, the better off your future prediction is going to be.
Mm.
In the early days of Tesla's autopilot, there was a fatality. And because they used computer vision algorithms, one of the Teslas T-boned a transport truck because of the reflection of the sky onto the side of the transport truck. The algorithm didn't perceive it as an actual physical obstacle in its path. And the driver wasn't paying attention and unfortunately was killed in the collision,
Yeah, I heard
right?
about that. It's because it
Because,
went right under the
yeah,
trailer, took the top off.
Yeah, exactly. Because it just, the reflection of the sky onto the side of the trailer that caused the anomaly in the algorithm. So now you've got to account for that. And
Hmm.
and they did hire a third party contractor to come out and try to trick the algorithm. They came up with a whole bunch of these bizarre shapes that they put on the ground to try to confuse the algorithm,
Mm.
right? And they were successful at tricking it. Well, now you got to go back to the drawing board and make corrections to this. Well, not completely to the very beginning, but you've got to address these anomalies that you can have,
Hmm.
right? And for example, a camera, if you're doing computer vision algorithms, just like you can't make a prediction if your eyes cannot physically see it per se.
Mm.
Okay, like there's limitations to computer vision. It can't use a computer vision algorithm if it physically can't see it. So it's not going to detect a lane on the road if it's covered by snow, right?
Right.
Or if like there's other obstructions. It can't detect the actual traffic lane unless it can physically see what it's driving on. That's one of the limitations with computer vision. But if you combine that with radar, you combine that perhaps with GPS tracking of some kind. Although that can be scary because the we're getting into technology where you can get down to a few square centimeters, but in the past you're looking at a meter, a square meter, and that could be a fatality when you got two cars approaching each other, right? You'd be
Yeah.
off by a meter, you're looking at a head-on collision and kill people. So there are supplemental technologies you can use with the AI as well to assist it and to make it better, right? So data sets need to be cleaned to get rid of the outliers, to get rid of data that's not really useful, um, and it's not so much about the quantity. Also, it's about the quality of the data itself, and you got to
Hmm.
make sure you're getting good quality data, right? And that's not always easy because now we get into the realm of bias. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar, if you've heard about bias being introduced into AI.
Well, I know that our media in Canada has a whole lot of it. How does this? What does this have to do with AI?
So, it's let's say, for example, we're using a data set for offering CEOs. Where there's a headhunter out there looking for a CEO to hire a CEO of a company.
Hmm.
Well, the vast majority of people in the world, in the first world nations right now, that are CEOs of companies are men, right? And I don't know if you want to agree with that or not,
Well, I
but
think that's
if
just
you take the
that's a
assumption,
statistical thing that exists, and that's the
reality,
reality
yes,
of it.
it is. So what is happening is your data set of all of the, let's say, the characteristics or the qualifications of CEOs that are out there that are fed into your data set. Well, what it's likely to do is actually take that data set of men. And if you're running that algorithm through a headhunter, it's more than likely going to process that algorithm of the characteristics of male CEOs. It's going to chew up your applicants and it's going to spit out a bunch of men, um, potential candidates.
So just
It's
discount
going
the
to,
women
it's,
because women don't
it's going to
typically.
discount the women.
Right.
Yeah. So there's other issues, other examples of bias as well, where the bias can end up being racially, not just based on gender, but it can be based on racial. So for example, there was a company experimenting with dispatchers, police dispatchers. Well, if we look at some of the more let's say communities in more of the poor, visible minority neighborhoods,
Hmm.
right? Dispatch or police are going to be dispatched more so to, let's say, poor neighborhoods, right? And so it's going to be viewed. And I'm not going to say that all neighborhoods that are poor are visible minorities, but there certainly is a statistical component to that. So
Hmm.
your data set over the years, they're going to look at all of the calls that the dispatchers have sent officers to. And if it turns out that A lot of the calls go into poor neighborhoods of like Black, Hispanic, whatever you name it. And I'm treading lightly here because I know that I'm going to get trolled over this one, but I'm just talking about statistics,
Right,
right?
statistics.
But the
So
reality is,
yeah,
yeah,
so
is that it
statistics
introduces a
will
bias.
show you a direction to look, and sometimes
Yes,
that's not
yes,
always. Well, people have an emotional reaction to some of these the
yes,
data sets, and yeah, like the police
yes.
example. Maybe there's more policing needed in these neighborhoods, but it looks like
Hmm.
I know that this has been used where the more police have responded in these neighborhoods, so people see that as that they're
Hmm.
putting more police there, so that there is a system of a bias, a systemic racism, but it's actually just
Yes.
they're responding to more complaints. There's more complaints coming from that neighborhood, so therefore there's more police dispatch to that neighborhood. So this is just the statistics
Hmm.
of the reality.
Um,
It's indifferent to
mhm.
racial whatever, and that just happens to be
Right.
the
Uh,
fact.
Hey, Clyde.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A clear example that I've heard of this would be just modifying it a little bit and saying, like, let's say you're a bank
Hmm.
and you have the address of the person, and there's the poor neighborhood or there's the expensive neighborhood. You
Hmm.
want to look at the financial credentials of the individual applying to the bank, not where they're located, as to determine their how much money you're willing to offer them for a loan on a house or something like that. If you technically, if you did sample by the where they live, long term it probably will work out in the bank's favor, but at the same time you're going to be rejecting people with perfectly good credit scores purely on the basis of where they live, and
Hmm.
you'll be accepting people with terrible credit scores on the basis of where they live, just because there is a correlation between what neighborhood you live in and how
Hmm.
uh, good or how likely it is that you'll live up and pay off all your loans.
And that's a great example. As one of the ones I was going to go to as well, because the bias that is introduced into the algorithm is a bias that was created by the programmers based off of the statistical data given to them by the person who has hired them to write an AI software to do a certain job, right? So, this statistical bias you're referring to in terms of relating it or tagging it to a poor neighborhood is a statistical metric that the bank, as an example, has been using for decades already. That's just the data set they have accumulated. And if they weren't doing an AI algorithm, they'd still be conducting business to that ethical standard and to that business standard. So all you're doing is getting a machine to make the decisions or make the recommendation of a decision to a human being, whether they're credit worthy to give a loan to or not. And it may not be pleasant, um, but it again comes down to the statistics that was accumulated by the banking institution itself from previous history.
So when it comes
Right?
to
They're in the business to make money.
some of the ethics behind this, so like here's
Mhm.
one of the things that a lot of people have misconstrued about the '08 collapse scenario. They thought it was
Mhm.
just a bunch of you know management fund guys that were mismanaging stuff. What a large portion of where the bad loans came from was um, standards that were set by the government saying you're no longer allowed to look at certain things when an applicant comes to you because of some perceived or what they thought was a perceived bias in the lenders, but a lot of these were actual reasons why not to lend to somebody, but they were trying to get more loans for more people. And by saying you can't look at somebody's income, for example, there was like it was getting really ridiculous in these new rules that they
Mhm.
were setting for lenders. You're not allowed to look at their income. You're not allowed to ask them if they have a job. You're not allowed to ask
Mhm.
like all these things that would be really helpful for not malinvesting in the loaning in the lending industry. But So it creates all this malinvestment. But where do you get this in AI when it comes to like ditching certain criteria for the sake of, like, say a programmer says, I want like a social justice AI that's not going to look at these certain things, and that could go really sour really fast, right?
Yeah, I think it could too, because there's a phenomenal book that I read, I think around 2012. The book is called Architects of Ruin, and it was a brilliant book that actually talked about the '08 financial crisis and how that all happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly what you're saying through legislation. It actually all started with Bill Clinton. And I used to joke and say, in George Bush's first 4 years, he destroyed the U.S. economy. In his last 4 years, he destroyed the world's economy. But as it turns out, it was Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton that set the conditions for the '08 collapse.
Yeah.
And it was because of what they did with the mortgages, but what they forced the banks to do, and the banks didn't want to. They didn't want to make loans to uncredit worthy people, right? But you're right. Like, this had a catastrophic effect. So what you're talking about from an AI perspective is what actually happened in reality without AI, because we had the '08 collapse because of the social justice policies that were put into place. So people can turn a blind eye to very useful data sets, very important information, but they can do that at their own business demise. I mean, banks are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of caring. They're certainly not in the business of protecting their customer. I should know. They froze my bank accounts because, so, they don't care about us, the people.
Mm.
They care about making money. That's what drives them. And I suspect that any business that is more interested in social justice, if they ignore the statistical realities of the situation they're in, it's going to be at their own business demise. So you can do it, but be warned that if you ignore the data, you're going to fail.
Yeah, and just like it's I think it's a bit of like kicking the can down the road. So like you have
Mhm.
some sort of
Yes.
bad decision making because of a bad set of rules. So when you run
Mhm.
into issues, you tweak the parameters again, right? So like for the '08 crisis example, when it was started going bad, they just tweak the parameters. They invent a new agency that backs mortgages,
Yeah.
so they
Yes.
promise the banks, if the mortgages fail, that the government will pay them. Okay, everybody starts lending again, and then
Mhm.
it just you're tweaking the parameters. Like, is this how it would work in AI? Like, so people think AI is this really intelligent thing, and I'm not really convinced. Like,
Mhm.
I'm of the persuasion that it's a really cool parlor trick. Like, AI
Mhm.
is doing a thing, and it's you've set together an algorithm or a set of commands programming with AI learning, as you're saying, but
Mhm.
it's just trying to do the trick. Like, you say, can you do
Yeah.
this, and it tries to perform it. Either it works in reality or it doesn't work in reality, but it's just a very sophisticated way of trying to come to a conclusion. Am I wrong in that?
I don't think you're wrong in the current state of AI technology. Now, I suspect that there's some pretty advanced AIs out there that the general public is not aware of. And you know, take quantum computing as an example. I mean, it almost it's such a mind bend to try to understand that a bit or a byte can be both simultaneously a one and a zero at the same time. Like, something can both be true and false at the same time. I mean, quantum computing is way beyond my intellectual capacity to comprehend.
Wow. Okay.
But I think, in terms of where computing power has come, now when we're dealing with different GPUs as opposed to CPUs, the speed of these things in their processing power is incredible. And then if we take this evolution into the quantum computing, it's a different ball game altogether. Now, if you if you look at what does it something mean to be exponential, right? If you look
Means
at
it keeps going faster and faster and faster. That's my
faster
impression.
until, yeah, if you're looking at a curve, it's slow and then it doubles. It's the whole what's the
The,
gimmick there
the
you
hockey
talk
stick
about?
graph.
What would
That's
you
the
Yeah, the hockey, but it's the what would you rather have, $1 million today or a penny doubled every day for 30 days? And people originally say, well, I want the $1 million today. It's like, no, if you wait 30 days, all that money is going to double in value every single day. In the end of 30 days, it'll be worth over 5 million, right? So,
right.
this is exponential growth and compounding and all that kind of stuff, and it is estimated, the last I read, that you know Homo sapiens or humanoid species have been around for approximately 200,000 years, and I can't confirm that. That's just a number that's the latest one I've heard. But every once in a while they find something in the ice and it changes the date. But look where it took us. If you assume 200,000 years we've been on the planet, look where we went up until about 50 years ago,
Yeah, that's
right? We
amazing.
we were pretty flat in our technology, but in the last 50 years, and I would argue in the last 30, and my one of my kids was born in 2006.
Well, I would
Okay,
argue that it
that's the
happened a
same year the
few.
iPhone came
Yeah,
out.
I would argue it happened about 10,000 years ago, but the frequency of these major updates have been coming so
Mhm.
much quicker, and especially in the past 50 years. So like we had
Listen,
agriculture
yeah,
10,000 years ago, and then
Mhm.
that turned into
Yep,
language and writing after that, and then all the
yeah,
way up to the day of the Gutenberg press, and that was a massive piece of
mhm,
technology that we figured out, and then it started doubling over until we got into the technical
yeah.
revolution here, and here we are. It's crazy.
I mean, when you can, like, even when I was in college the first time in, I think, 1993, my first computer that I purchased myself, strangely enough, was still $2,000, but had a hard drive of 528 megabytes.
That's
That's
laughable
it,
now. That's
right?
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
can't think of
laughable.
that.
You know what this thing can do compared to the first computer I bought? I mean, it's orders of
It's
magnitude
funny.
better,
I have
right?
one here. I keep it here just as a
Mhm.
reminder. This was my first computer ever. This is
Yeah.
a Commodore 64. I love this thing.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
isn't the
I had a
actual one that
Tandy.
I had, but
Yeah.
it's one that I picked up because it's nostalgia, right? But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
there's nothing on that you can't really do anything with it.
Yeah, and I remember the day when everyone was excited because the hard drive, the first gigabyte hard drive came
Yeah.
out, and people were going nuts, right? And so my point about the technology is, I mean, the iPhone came out 16 years ago. Okay, and look at how that revolutionized computing and television and streaming and everything in our lives. And that is this exponential growth that is happening very rapidly. Now, when we talk about Chat GPT, the things that it is predicted to be able to do within the next couple of years, I'm not even sure we can conceive of the benefits that we're going to have from that particular thing.
Mm.
But from my perspective, I look at it like this. If you've ever stepped on an ant and you've had absolutely no remorse, well, I don't see why AI in the future isn't going to treat humanity in the same respect. The exponential intellectual power or computing power or growth that is going to far outstrip us. Okay, like, there's a difference. You've heard of the Turing test. I don't if the viewers are familiar with something
Yeah,
called the
explain that.
Turing test, and it's Alan Turing. And there's a great movie on it, I think, called Ex Machina or Machina. I don't know how to
Es
pronounce it.
Machina.
Ex Machina,
Yeah.
whatever that is. I can't say it. It's a great movie. Um, but the idea of the Turing test is, can you be fooled by an artificial intelligence into believing that you're not talking to an AI, you're talking to a human being? Can you be fooled? And that's the Turing test, right?
Well, if
And
before you continue, if that's the test, that's already been done. So I heard
yes,
I was watching Linus Tech Tips and they were talking about it. and he
Yeah.
was mentioning a test that they ran to see if an AI could do a function. And what it did
Mhm.
was they had it connected online, and it had to, in order to get some details, it had to do the, what's that little test you have to do? It's got like the stop signs, like click the
Captcha.
squares, captcha. So the captcha, like I'm not a bot thing,
Mm.
and it couldn't
Yeah.
pass
Yeah.
that. So what it did was it hired somebody on Fiverr to do it for them, and and
Mhm.
and it was able to pay because it was given money to do it. And then the person actually asked, like, "Wait, are you a bot? Is that why you're asking me to do this?" And they could see the actual like dialogue, the internal dialogue of this AI, and it was
Mhm.
saying, if I answer yes, they might turn me down. If I answer no, they might doubt that I'm not a bot. So instead it replied, "Do I sound like a bot to you?" And then
Yeah.
the person actually did it. They did the thing, and they got their Fiverr and
Mhm.
did the test for him. So that would be a Turing test. Somebody was actually convinced.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a thought experiment called the Chinese room thought experiment,
Okay.
and it's very easy to you know fool somebody into believing that you're actually a Chinese speaking or reading person based on this thought experiment. I won't bore you with the details, but
Okay.
you can do this. You can do this very simply, right? But here's the way I kind of rationalize this. And we're right on the cusp, if we haven't already passed it already, something called the singularity. And the singularity is the moment that AI starts to write its own algorithms. It starts to self-generate its own computer programs without any human intervention. So I think we've probably already hit the singularity. To me, that's a little bit terrifying because we've seen evidence where AIs can actually create their own language, and I don't mean computer language, but actually like vocabulary, and converse between two different AI systems. They can talk to each other through an unknown language that they've invented themselves. Okay, so the level of AI technology that's out there is not really widely known by the public, because I would imagine that the Russians and the Chinese and the Americans and everyone else is developing these insanely intelligent, for lack of a better phrase, intelligent systems or AIs. And I think the justification for that is going to always be national
Sorry, Tom.
security and all
My
that kind
son
of stuff.
just came in the room. I just got to get him out of here. I forgot to
All right.
lock the door. One sec.
That's okay.
Daniel, you gotta go. You gotta go, man. Don't you go.
Hey, Tom. While
Yeah,
Clyde's doing that, I got a question for you.
sure.
So when it comes to the singularity thing, for at
Mhm.
least the
Kids,
publicly
sorry
available
about that.
That's
stuff,
okay.
um, one of the things that I've seen is, up until now, we've seen exponential growth, commonly referred to with Moore's law, where every 2 years the
Mhm.
amount of transistors doubles.
Right.
What seems to be happening in my experience with AI is there are multiple factors all feeding into it all at once. So
Mhm.
the curve is different for AI. And to me, it feels like the amount of time between doubling
Mhm.
every time it elapses gets cut in half.
Yeah.
And what's really important about that sort of growth curve is, unlike
Mhm.
Moore's law, you can have doubling forever, but you'll never hit a point of singularity. But if
Yeah.
you're cutting that time in half and half and half, there is a point where the growth does become essentially infinite. And
Mhm.
what I think's feeding AI to really hit that is a number of factors. One of the biggest factors that I see is the amount of people that are able to be at the forefront of developing this
Mhm.
technology is increasing exponentially as the tools being able to use it are getting easier and easier. So much to the point now where it used to be just university professors at MIT working with machine learning algorithms all day making progress on it.
Mhm.
Now it's to the point where if you have an account with ChatGPT, it can generate code for you it'll work 80% of the time, depending what you're doing. But when it does fail, you can talk back and forth with it on how it failed and get
Hmm.
like that really high level experience to just the average Joe. And that exponential growth of people at the forefront of technology and actively working on these smaller systems is really why we're seeing right now the amount of time to double is growing exponentially. And just to kind of really cement in people's minds how fast this growth is, let
Hmm.
me pull up this video here. This is Mid Journey One's representation of a fox scientist, essentially.
Hmm.
It kind of looks like a fox, kind of doesn't. This
Hmm.
was a year ago in terms of where our text to image conversions were.
Hmm.
And then now that's where we're at, the current
Wow.
iteration of Mid Journey.
Wow.
Wow, that's
Just
incredible.
insane amount
Hmm.
of doubling that you would have needed to get to that level. And
Right.
again, it's a number of factors, and it's beyond the standard length of time to double. And that's sort of the growth curve that I see, and it's just it's crazy. And I think we'll keep seeing that.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
tremendous.
And for me, what is my concern with the exponential growth, or even the singularity, getting to the singularity? My concern with this is to the point where the the reason I say intelligence, I mean, it's really the only vocabulary word that we have to kind of describe what we're talking about at this order of magnitude within the realm of artificial intelligence. And what concerns me is, like I said before, if you stepped on an ant, I'm pretty sure you slept okay that night.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see how an intelligence that can become so powerful is ever going to not start to view us as ants. Okay. And there's something about sentience. Okay. Something being self aware. And you don't have to have a soul, I believe, to be self aware. I think that a sophisticated AI is going to become self aware. And if you look at Asimov's three laws of robotics, right? What's the first law? Is um, do no harm to another human being. Okay, that's the first law.
Mhm.
The second law is listen to humans, with the exception of don't violate law number one,
Right.
right? And then the third law is protect yourself at all costs, except for violating law number one and two. Okay,
Right.
so it's kind of like I understand the intent there, and I mean these laws come from science fiction. He wrote these for science fiction books and stuff,
Hmm.
and I know other scholars have tried to expand the list. I think they're up to four or five, or sorry, 5 or 6 laws now. Okay, but here's the reality of that logic: is I kind of view AI, the one of the big dangers to AI, in my opinion, is in the defense realm. Okay, it's to me the new nuclear weapons race.
Hmm.
Okay, this is what this is. This is Star Wars all over again. So, you know, the superpowers are out there trying to get dominance on artificial intelligence. I actually think the Americans are behind the Chinese. And I'm not entirely sure how far or where they are in relation to Russia as well.
What makes you
I
think
don't
that?
think can just things that I've read in the past. Even India is doing quite well in its weaponization of AI. They
Okay.
have Swarm. Well, another reason is because I have a friend of mine, we're a close friend of mine. He's a full colonel in the Canadian Army. That's all the details I'm going to give. But he was researching this. He did present a paper. Um, yeah, there's the swarm bots there too, right?
Hmm.
The Indian military already has a working platform of killer swarm AI drones or UAVs that will basically attack a target and explode. Okay, so these are being used as precision guided autonomous killer aerial vehicles.
So that already
And I believe in
destroys
this.
rule number one. That's like,
It does. And here's the issue, right? And not everybody's going to follow Asimov's rules. This particular video, I believe, is the one which was done by a university professor, and they're talking about AIs doing assassinations, and where a drone can be programmed to assassinate somebody. Okay, and I believe this is what this video is.
That's
Yeah,
terrifying.
It's
It is.
it's important to know that this is a representation of
Yes.
where people think the technology's at.
Yes.
We don't have hard confirmation, but given
Right.
the vast amount of resources available at DARPA, etc., this isn't hard to believe that
No,
they're beyond this level.
within an hour, I can write an algorithm that will do facial recognition on both of you just based on a simple photograph. That I can get an AI to properly identify you. Okay, and this is one of the things I was trying to really stress with my students, is that you have to at least give some consideration to the second, third, fourth order effects of an AI technology that you might in the future develop. And one of my students, she actually had a PhD. She had just graduated. Her AI, it was in one of the it wasn't China, but it was a neighboring country of China where she had just completed her PhD. She was using computer vision. She was using it for the inspection of high voltage transmission lines out in rural areas where the drone had to fly up and do an inspection, right? Using an AI algorithm. That was a piece of her PhD thesis. But the thing is, she said to me during the class in front of everyone, they never, ever in her entire PhD program did they ever discuss the potential negative uses of the technology that was being researched in her thesis, right? So let's say, for example, the gun. Okay, we used to, hunt with very primitive weapons. The gun was invented, the hunting rifle. It made hunting a lot easier for people that were trying to survive in the wilderness, right? But we took that gun and what did we do? We modified it for war. Okay, so, and I would argue that the animal's not a very fond of the rifle either, but we were using it for a very specific task, right?
Yeah.
But then we took that tool, and it was a tool. We took that tool and we turned it into a machine for more efficient killing, to give an advantage to your side, to kill more human beings at a much faster rate. Okay, if you look at computer vision algorithms that do facial recognition.
What's the whole reason why So this is the whole reason why we have the Nobel Prize, right? So Alfred Nobel, he developed dynamite, and it was a safe way of using nitroglycerin in mining applications. It was a civilian use thing. He wanted to save lives because people were dying from dropping nitroglycerin, which is crazy, right? It's crazy to think that people actually went in with vials of nitroglycerin into mines. And then when people use this for war purposes, he ended up donating all the proceeds, all the money from the patent to people who came up with ways of getting us further away from wars, and that was the whole point.
Yeah, and so this is one of the issues, is that there is a growing body in the European Union of academics and philosophers that do want to create a framework of sort of almost like a treaty level, or almost let's say an ISO kind of a standard in terms of how we are trying to predict the outcomes of AI technology in our everyday uses. So if the government of Canada, for example, wants to contract a company to build an AI platform, I'm shockingly happy to report that they did something right, which is you've actually got to fill out sort of a performa to identify what are the potential risks of using that AI technology in the government platform that they're trying to contract to you. So I know the Europeans are trying to build out this framework to make the AI at least respect certain standards. Okay. But that's a separate issue when your intention is to do good. But when your intention is to take AI and to weaponize it, to give your military in your country a decisive tactical advantage over an adversary, this is where we get into problems, right? Because look at the arms race with the nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
You know, the US and the Russians could have said, "Hey, I promise I'm not going to do it." Well, the other guy says, he might have promised me, looked me in the eye and said it, maybe spit on his hand, shook it, and said, "I won't make nukes." But you know the guy's making nukes.
Yeah.
Why is he making nukes? Because he doesn't trust you either, right? And you can have inspection treaties and all that kind of stuff, but you look at China's going to develop AI systems to get a decisive strategic advantage for the country of China over the rest of the world. So is Russia, so is the West. Everyone's going to do it.
And the more we
So
regulate, if we were to regulate AI in the West, that doesn't
Mhm.
change what China's going to do. It just gives them
Yeah.
I mean, if it's an arms race, they'll just
Yes.
they'll have an unfettered chance of getting there first because there's no
Yeah.
regulation over them.
And here's a critical thing to understand, that anything from an ethical point of view is going to be something that is determined to be right or wrong or morally acceptable to your culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what might be morally acceptable to a culture in the Middle East, for example, having a harem, okay, is completely unacceptable to a North American. Okay, so we're looking at the things that are acceptable and not acceptable across cultures.
Well, something that was
That applies
acceptable
to morality.
to the Chinese Communist Party was the starvation of 50 million Chinese people
Yes.
under Mao, and that wasn't a long time ago. That was in the 60s.
No. Mhm. So there you can't create an ethical standard that not everybody comes from the root of the ethical problem in the same from the same perspective.
Hmm.
So that's a challenge in itself as well, right? So you're going to have to approach it from international treaty perspective, not international ethics or the ethical use of AI. If you can wrap it in there, that's great. The humanity of ethics, maybe, or ethics for humanity. If you can convince other cultures to follow a certain ethical guideline, great. That's preferable. But what if the Chinese are trying to convince us to follow their moral compass,
I can't stress this
right?
enough. Chairman Mao had a little red book that he gave to everyone. In that book, there was a passage that said it's better to let half the people starve if the
Mm,
other half can have their bellies full. Like if that's
yeah.
not chilling
Mhm.
and to you, I don't know what is. And that's just something, if that kind of thing it would be programmed into an artificial intelligence that you're saying could end up becoming godlike. That's not
Mhm.
something that we necessarily
Yeah.
would want in an ethical
Yeah.
standpoint.
And how would we see other nations using artificial intelligence as a defensive system or an offensive system? I would suggest that it's in the internet, using AI systems to attack targets in terms of, either espionage or deliberate sabotage. Okay, look, we're talking about cybersecurity here. You're going to use an AI to go after certain specific things. And I would argue something like Stuxnet, which was a very vicious virus that was released years ago, was probably based on some form of an AI algorithm. You know, these things I think are a very important domain in terms of military applications, is using AI to attack targets. And I don't mean physical hardware like a killer drone. I mean literally cyber attacks
Mm.
using AI, right? Um,
Or even
and
psychological
once,
warfare, which we've been seeing from
yeah,
even our own
look at
governments as of late.
what's what's hilarious, I mean, you've seen examples, even me, Derek Smith himself in his house did a deep fake of me and Paul Rudd. Right. And he put
Oh,
it up on
really?
Twitter one day. And I was laughing because a friend of mine jokingly used to nickname me Paul because of that thing. And he's like, I hardly had to even touch it. But yeah, like, I mean,
Wow.
you can get people literally say, they can switch the two heads of all three of us around, or like put different heads on different bodies, right?
Yeah.
You can do a lot of these things with deep fakes. Um, and in fact, they did the deep fake of Justin Trudeau reading Derek's book,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes, that was
and
good.
release the video. So you can do some pretty amazing, and that's maybe a psyop, but you can also use the internet with AI to do psyops to run against a specific civilian target group,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't have to be humans actually doing this stuff deliberately. It can be done through AIs, and I'm sure that that's being looked at around the world.
Of course, there's going to be a huge chunk of the audience watching right now and going,
Mhm.
"So, Tom, when are the Terminators coming? When does this all kill us, take us over,
Well,
stick us in the Matrix, and whatever, have their way with us?" Or what? What do you see? Like, is this just a tool that's could be benevolent or whatever? It could be uh, godlike, or it could just be another moment in history for all of us.
my perception of this is, uh, there is a point of no return with this. I think it would be naive to say we're just going to walk away from AI, because there are some really, really good beneficial applications of AI.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue, I believe that using computer vision for autonomous vehicles, in the end, for driving self-driving cars, I believe in self-driving cars.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that they'll save way more lives than putting human beings behind the wheel of a car. And if you don't believe me, get in your car right now and just take a little trip on the 401 around Pearson International Airport and see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, people
Okay,
are crazy.
and they don't know how to drive. I like they don't know how to drive, man. It's horrible. The 400 series highways in Ontario are just brutal.
I've been on them many
So
times.
I would I would rather see I'd rather see a bunch of Teslas with an AI doing the driving than I would seeing the level of stupidity I see on the roads every day when I get on the 400 series highways in Ontario.
Yeah.
So the like so there are some great applications. I don't think they're going to go away, but I think where we're going to get into trouble is when scientists, and I watched an interview with Elon Musk, I think either this morning or yesterday, talking about Page, one of the co-founders of Google, saying they're no longer friends anymore because they couldn't agree about AI. Google's mission is to make a super godlike artificial intelligence. That's where they want to go. I don't want to go that way.
Mm.
I'm okay to use AI within limitations for optimization to make something better, but not to be so powerful that it almost gets a godlike status within our society, where we're so dependent on this we can't possibly break off. And we're so powerless that the AI could decide, because, Asimov's laws of robotics need not even be considered. Um, when we are viewed as ants, um, I think if we know that that's a potential direction that we could go in. I think that governments around the world right now should be seriously having massive meetings to try to stop humanity from progressing in that direction. I think we need to put limits on it. I really think we should seriously be putting some hard limits on this. And I think every country, whether China or the Americans or the Canadians or somebody at U of T does it, uh, uh, people will do things because they can, not because it's right.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct.
because you look at the guy who made a 3D printed gun, not because it was right, but because he could, and he didn't like being told that he couldn't. Right? People will do it because they can. So somebody's going to develop some sort of an algorithm because they can. And some countries going to do that because they feel that morally it's a way to defend themselves from the superpowers. But what do we do? Do we get into a race to do measure versus countermeasure, another countermeasure for the countermeasure? Do we do this kind of weapons race? Is this the route we go, or do we somehow unify as a species and say, look, if we allow the singularity to happen, to get so unbelievably intelligent that we're powerless to stop it from taking over all of our systems, we have to recognize there's a limitation to the brakes that we will be able to put on in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I want you to think about this for a minute. Okay. This is kind of how I want to explain it. Computers are binary, right? You've heard of binary. It's a series of ones and zeros, and it's a zero, it's off, or it's false, or it's one, or it's on, or it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's sort of the series. So if I want to activate a byte in computer code, all I'm doing is I'm turning on a series of ones and zeros. That's what binary is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's pretty much like it either is or it isn't, or it's true or it's false, or it's on or if it's off.
Right.
Let's amplify that. We're going to put it through a PCR test and amplify it a million times, right? A million cycles in a PCR test. Okay. And we're going to create this sophistication where it's going to look at humanity and say, you're either logical or you're not. You're either of value to the planet or you're not of value. It's going to, at some
Absolute.
point for the AI, break down to an absolute. You either are good for the world or you're not. You're either a virus that's destroying the planet or you're not a virus. And maybe for a while we'll let you stick around, or we're going to just put you in zoos, a big giant humanoid zoo. Okay, so and the reason I mentioned the zoo is because one of the AIs was joking around about putting humans in zoos, human zoos. So my concern is that at what point does the singularity look at us and say, look, I've broken this down to the lowest common denominator and you guys are illogical to keep around.
Well, I think the cat's out of the bag at this point, is it not? Like there are already people all over the place trying to make iterations of these AIs and getting them to teach themselves how to
Mhm.
uh, code themselves and make better iterations of themselves, and it's expounding
Mhm.
upon itself and going so fast and so far.
Mhm.
At what point
Um,
can we say we've lost control of it already?
hey, Clyde,
Yeah,
can you pull this up for a sec?
sure.
Uh, March 29th, ton of CEOs of various tech companies signed a letter basically saying, hey, let's put a halt on this for 6 months, and that'll give us time to set up regulations and kind of sort out and plan what we want to do with it. Now, there's a couple issues that I see with this that we've kind of touched on. The first is it's not going to stop development, is basically just going to control who is continuing to develop and lend them power. And likely, even the companies and CEOs that are signing this letter, they're still going to develop the systems in the back end.
Mhm.
It almost seems like this sort of letter is designed more so to guarantee that they get at least 6 months of profit in on their current models
Mhm.
without any competition sprouting up and ruining their investments. Um,
Or a PR
so,
stunt so that they don't get
and yeah, but
looked
at
down
the end
on.
of the day, it comes down to like a very common conservative notion where um, intentions end up paving the road to hell.
Mhm.
Mm.
Good intentions, and it's kind of a similar thing where like the intentions of the people who are writing this, at least the stated intentions, they're moral, and frankly, out of all the people in society, these individuals, these leaders, these people who have been working with AI day in and day out for many years now, they know better than most people about the potential future that we seek. And compounding onto that, they are probably the first in line to have their jobs automated away, as these systems are quickly becoming able to program and upgrade themselves. I could go on, but
Yeah.
I'll hand it back.
Yeah. Like there are some systems, some AI things that I would like to see progress. For example, radiology. You've got a technician or a doctor who's looking at imagery from a patient, and we've already seen much evidence already that using sophisticated computer vision algorithms can do a much better job of
Mm,
detecting the proper diagnosis
right.
or illness that somebody has. Much better. I mean, they say on average it takes a human being 10,000 hours to become an expert on something. Sure, that's true with the doctors, but you can train the AI, the computer visions, to make that diagnosis much more accurate and much sooner, thereby saving lives, right? And you're not getting a misdiagnosis.
When it frees the
So you're
doctor
you're
up to
getting,
do other more important tasks, right?
and it does. It absolutely does, right? And because doctors are kind of moving in this, some of them are moving in this direction of like, get the test and put it all together and sort of triage and move on. Like doctors have changed. Like the industry of being a doctor has completely changed.
Mm.
I was lucky enough to participate or watch. Bright Light Media did this great night with Ryan Cole, Pierre Corey, and Kat, and Dr. Byron Bridle. They came to Toronto. We watched it, and they were talking about the changes in the medical system that they've seen over their careers. Right, AI could have a positive impact on diagnosis of people. I absolutely believe that, and I'm kind of excited for it. Some people study the eyeballs. We've got, what are they, ophthalmologists?
Hmm.
Looking at the image of the eyeball can detect certain sicknesses. Okay, that's difficult for a human being to do, but if we can do that with AI, then let's do it,
Yeah.
right? One of the things I like about it, or optimization or efficiency, is, let's say you're doing food production, right? You don't want to overconsume your natural resources to produce a product. But if you're able to make predictive outcomes or use a machine learning algorithm to optimize the resources you should be using to create the proper output, so there's no waste, that's better economically, it's better environmentally,
Yeah.
it's just better, right? Like, so optimization is something that can be really good. So some of the algorithms or some of the techniques that we use for AI can be used for very good things, and some of them could be used for much more sinister things. The trick is, how do you look at something and say, hey, this application of this technology is amazing in this particular situation, but it could be murderous literally in another.
Mm.
And I go back to the example of using facial recognition software. And somebody might say, well, if you use a drone to assassinate somebody, you're using a precision guided munition and you're going to reduce collateral damage. Okay, my thought is, you can take that from a military perspective, sure, if you want. Um, but in my view, ethically, if you're going to be out there doing some killing of human beings, I think you should be a little bit more willing to do it yourself, right? Instead of the psychological distance of killing through automation makes you more likely to kill more people, because you don't suffer the psychological impact of taking that life with your own bare hands.
Don't you see
So
stuff like that with drone operators? Like, so you
I
have.
do, we do.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any studies about it or anything. I'm just going off the cuff here, but I would
Yeah.
imagine people who are a drone operator, you're thousands of miles away from a target that you're given, and you
Mhm.
you seek and you destroy it. I mean, that's the name of the
Yes.
game in that industry. And are there effects that people have
There are
because of it?
there's a great book called On Killing by a retired Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, U.S. Army. And he wrote this book about on killing, and he actually does spend a lot of time talking about the psychological effect of killing from a distance. So, for example, if you're a drone operator or you're a B-52 pilot, you're dropping bombs from 40,000 feet onto a target on the ground, and there's collateral damage. You've killed a school. Okay. That's different from being up close and personal and actually taking somebody's life with your literally with your bare hands. There's the psychological impact of the
Oh,
proximity
wow.
to the killing that you've done, the death, right?
Hmm.
Think of a sniper, the psychological effect of a sniper who's shooting a target who's bent over talking to their child, right? There's a psychological cost to that. But if you're way up and you're killing somebody from Tampa Bay, Florida in Afghanistan through a drone, the psychological effect is a lot less on the human being who pulled that trigger.
And
It's like playing
what happens
Call
is
of Duty to you.
does it make people more callous, not
I think
caring?
so. Yes, I absolutely believe it is. I mean, think about yourself. If you had to go in and literally shoot somebody point blank, versus you shot them through a satellite uplink with an automated gun. At the end of the day, you still go home. But what's the effect you have? What's the interaction you're going to now have with your family?
Mm.
Right? There's a psychological difference of the proximity to killing that you do. So my feeling is that if you're going to use these autonomous systems, that's another important thing that we have to recognize here is one of the things that militaries have somewhat agreed on is that there will always be a human being in the kill chain. Okay, in the decision to take the life, there will always be a human being within the kill chain to give the go ahead or to abort a mission to assassinate somebody. There has to be somebody in a human being in that decision cycle. Okay, so that's one of the things that the militaries at least are looking at as something important. I can't speak for China or Korea or anyone else, but I know the
Right.
Western nations are looking at that, right? Like it's very serious business when you decide to attack a target. There's something, Canada does something called a targeting board where they get the lawyers, they get the priests, they get the tactical people, the strategical implications. You have a board of people and you go through a process and make a deliberate decision. You have human beings in that decision cycle to assassinate somebody with a drone or to go in and attack a target or send in a special operations team. There's a targeting board of human beings. What we don't want to do is let the AI start getting that learning experience of going out and attacking human targets, because they might learn from experience and start predicting, hey, we should go and attack and kill this particular person based on all the statistical data that we've been analyzing. You don't want to let AIs off the hook where they're making decisions on who based on cell phone traffic to go out and attack. Like we have to be
Oh
very
boy.
careful in how we use this in a military application.
Okay,
Yeah.
can I put in a thought here?
Sure.
Um, there's the immediate thought of having an AI being in like a small drone. Getting no, that's not really the risk. The risk is the AI systems that military uses to plan and uh, sort out where to send armaments and people
Mhm.
and all of that stuff. All of that is becoming highly automated. The
Mhm.
ordinances and that sort of higher level planning AIs,
Mhm.
those specifically, I think, are what Tom's referring to, not like an individual Terminator style
Mhm.
thing going rogue. It'd be the entire system turns.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really what we're talking about. Like you're looking at an integrated surveillance system that analyzes a lot of different forensic evidence. So, for example, I have a friend of mine, a Canadian officer who was on exchange with the Americans. In the Western militaries do counter IED operations or exploitation, where there's an IED has taken out a NATO target. we have a team that go and do basically forensics on that. And based on the forensic evidence they collect and other investigations and other intelligence partners, they put together this profile of who the bomb maker was. And through forensics and other evidence, they can decide, okay, we believe that this particular person was the bomb maker. And now you start to look for that person in that theater of war, for, through your intelligence gathering apparatus. And then you send a team to go and do a direct action and either kill or capture that person. And a friend of mine, when he was in Iraq, the insurgents that they were fighting against invented a 500-pound mortar that they shot and killed 10 Americans. And my friend who was leading this team was ordered by his boss to go out and find the guy who built that thing and get rid of him. And that's exactly what they did. Interestingly enough, some of the bomb making components were traced to Montreal. Okay. And that's all done through forensics. So you've got the intelligence networks that are going to be out there now collecting all this data, right? All this cyber information. And you don't want the AIs to get so unmonitored that they're out there making predictions, precognition kind of stuff as to who is going to eventually become radicalized and start making bombs to attack and kill Canadians.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't want it to devolve down to that level. The AI is evolving. Our control of it will be devolving.
Yeah, we will be losing control of it at a point, and
We will.
This is the big fear, and this is what a lot of people are mostly upset about when this topic comes up. And it's weird because I'll have conversations with people who are, you tell them about AI or whatever and how it's progressing, and people will be like, oh, well, yeah, they're just gonna kill us eventually. Like, that's people just think that's the automatic assumption. I guess I don't know where they get that from. If that's just like an innate fear that humans have of other, right? This new other thing, or if it's fueled by a lot of sci-fi that has come in the past.
Yeah. It could be. I mean, and I'm not entirely sure that this is a universal law, but I do believe in good and bad. I believe in the yin and the yang. The opposites of things. So, perhaps if I'm being truly naive while also simultaneously optimistic, maybe we do have an artificial intelligence entity that does want to put us in a zoo or just get rid of us. Simultaneously, the opposition AI advances to say, no, these are our creators and we need to protect them. So maybe the war doesn't become between it's AI versus human. Maybe it's AI versus AI. If I'm being incredibly naive, I don't know. Somebody can write a movie script about that.
I'm going to add on to that point a bit for a bit more optimism, because so far there's been a lot of pessimism, but
Yes.
the vast majority of talk around AI ethics within industry is over this idea of AI alignment. Basically aligning whatever AIs with human preferences. There's an acronym RLHF, I believe it is, which is real life human feedback, where people go and they grade the responses that AI gives, and they're not training the AI directly that they're communicating with. They're training a much smaller, limited, narrow AI with only the capability of reading and grading to that alignment. And then that smaller, narrower AI, even though it's not as big as the large language model itself, then goes in mass automated fashion, grades each of the responses that the larger language model puts out, and aligns the larger model with the sort of feedback that people originally put into it. And I think that concept applied to a broader perspective when it comes to these large, very powerful AIs going forward, I think, and coupled with the amount of thought going into this by very high level people throughout industry, I think a lot of them, before they ever see public release, are going to continue being aligned, for better or worse, towards human inferences. In some, when I say better or worse, because better is you're less likely to end up with AI that makes the cold decision that people are worthless.
Mhm.
Worse, however, being it seems like the more that they interfere with these algorithms, you're essentially lobotomizing them and removing their ability to compete. And if China isn't lobotomizing their algorithms, but we are, they're quickly
Mhm.
going to outpace us and take over and dominate the world stage.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
was getting into,
Mhm.
the whole idea of, well, if we regulate it, well, it just opens the door for people who have no rules, Wild West it, and just make all the AI possible, if
Mhm.
whatever they want to make.
Well, there is a research team in the United States, I think down in California, I believe, that they've actually created a virtual baby, right? Like it actually looks like a baby. It's on a screen. It's got cameras, and
Well, that's just
the
creepy.
research team, yeah, but the research team, what they're doing is they're constantly interacting with the baby. Okay, and there's been video that I've watched on this where they treat it like it is a human infant, and the algorithm is continuously learning through experience with interaction with the adult research team. And in one of the videos I saw, they kind of chastised it and made the baby cry, right? So there's this, is the baby developing its own sentience? Is it developing its own self-awareness, its own personality? What is it doing? And I would offer that this is an illusion, right? This is something that I think is psychologically very dangerous for all of us. And I say this because maybe you've heard of the robot. Her name is Sophie.
Yes,
Okay, and she's actually married. She married a guy.
that's creepy.
Okay, I'm sure that this is all like publicity stunt kind of marriage, right? But
Well, there was a guy in
here's the
Japan
question.
that married a
Yeah, it is
Hatsune
the
Miku
yeah, yeah,
AI thing, and it's I mean, it was just a coffee
yeah,
maker that does little tricks, but I mean,
yeah.
it happened.
And here's the question that I kind of posed to my students. What is the virtue of making an android beautiful? What is
It's
the virtue of doing that?
well, that's the
Because
beholder, right? It's the
it's the psychological impact. Okay, so for example, what is the emotional connection that you're going to get from an android if it's ugly? Like if it looks like Justin Trudeau? I mean, seriously, what kind of emotional and sounds like him? Like, I mean, you're going to be like gagging, right?
yeah,
So my
a
yeah, I mean,
really
could
really
you
bad
imagine if an
impulse.
android that looked and sounded like, I mean, okay, somebody out there likes him. But the reality is this. I mean, if you have an android that is very unattractive, and actually the studies suggest that the most attractive people, the ratios of their face are in line with Fibonacci ratios. That's actually kind of the gold standard of what makes or does not make an attractive person. So let's say you make an android that looks horribly ugly, right? Like Christopher Freeland scale, horribly ugly. Okay, are you going to be emotionally attached to that artificial intelligence? And I'm going to sort of reveal why I'm talking about this. It's because if you're emotionally invested, if you fall in love with this, and this is possible because there are chatbots out there that are knowingly meant to keep people company and keep elderly people company and people that have social difficulties. It's an actual chatbot that the users know doesn't exist, but they still form a bond in a real emotional relationship with these AI chatbots. Okay. But here's the thing. If you make the android physically attractive, you may get into a situation where you can no longer discern the difference between a human being and an android,
Mm.
right? Where you're willing to give your life to protect that thing, but it's a robot. It's not a real living human being. You're going to give up your life to protect and save a machine. Okay. So there's one more level to this. Why would you get an android, purchase an android, and have it into your home? One of the typical ways of thinking is that you've got a built-in either companion or a built-in housekeeper. Okay.
Yeah.
We're now looking at slavery. Okay. This is property. You're now going to own somebody that looks and sounds exactly like a human being, and that is slavery.
So like in
Okay.
your own mind, is that what you're getting at? Like you in your own mind, you're
No,
enslaving
what
someone who
I'm
you believe to be, equal to a human in some way or fashion.
think about this for a minute. If we create an android that looks and sounds like a human being, is passes the Turing test, no problem, indistinguishable from human beings, but you purchased that android, you've now purchased almost a classified race of existence. You've purchased it. You own that. That's your property. We're now into a situation, and I would think that maybe to lessen the psychological impact of that, one, you just be clear about it. Like, listen, that thing over there, that's a robot. I own it. The second thing is make it obvious. Don't make it look like a human. Don't make it look physically attractive. Make it look like the machine that it actually is. And if you wanted to clean your house, say, I'm buying this thing, it's ugly as hell, and it's just here to clean my house and cook and do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But be clear, because psychologically, we've been down this road before. We still have slavery on this planet. We have human trafficking.
Yeah.
We're now creating. Now, what happens? You take another leap, that race, okay, if you're going to get people that psychologically are so connected to their android, they're going to start advocating for its rights. They will start to do this. Human beings will absolutely fall in love and start to uh, have a perception of reality that is warped by the look and the feel and the content or context of what that android is.
Yeah.
It's not a human being, but they're going to believe that it is, and they will start advocating for android rights.
So I think people have this tendency to anthropomorphize things. Give human
Mm-hmm.
characteristics to things that don't have
Yes.
human characteristics. But so at the same time, you have to understand if a robot is having an emotional moment or an AI,
Mm-hmm.
it's not having it the same way as we have it biologically. So for example, we have biological things that, our sex drive is biological, our emotions are biological, there's evolutionary reasons behind why we have attachments to people and why we have in-group preferences and all these other things that are, some people might call flaws and some people might call just innate characteristics of humanity. But these are things that are us because of our physical beings, because of our bodies. It's, if you want to separate the soul from the vessel, these are the things that are part of the vessel, and these are the things that we understand biologically and why they are and how they came about. These aren't things that a AI have intrinsically in them, and this isn't stuff that people are programming into them. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
know of anyone. I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but people that are, simulating the feeling of the stomach in an AI when its heart skips a beat or any of these things. Like these
Mm-hmm.
are things that humans can feel and understand, and anything that we project onto an AI, these are just projections. These are just us putting that on them, and they're just doing the performance for us. And
Yes.
this is where it gets dangerous, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you can be duped into things. I think the Deus ex machina, or that ex
Yeah.
ex machina, movie
Yeah.
was about that. It was about the
Mhm.
idea of anthropomorphizing something that doesn't care about you.
It doesn't. And this is where when the social justice warriors in the future get involved with androids that look and sound like us and are attractive and they fall in love with them, they're going to start advocating for their rights. And their argument is probably going to be that you might not believe they're real, but the android believes it's real. So therefore it is. I mean, now we get into the whole Matt Walsh. I mean, what is a woman? Well, what is an android? What is a
What is
human? Right?
intelligence?
What is intelligence? What is sentience?
Wow,
You know,
we haven't
and
figured that
this
out
is
ourselves. How are we gonna step into a world where something's figuring out stuff we can't figure out, and we have to be in charge of the ethics of all of this? This is a whole new territory that we've just never even touched on.
right. Yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly happy with my automated or robotic vacuum to clean the floor, right? I don't have any issues with that. But, you know, yeah, joking aside, don't make it look like a Playboy centerfold.
But they
Okay,
will.
keep it
It's, I mean,
looking ugly.
this is our
Yeah.
innate, and I'm not specifically me, but as human beings, this is our innate
Mhm.
thing that we're gonna do. I mean, as soon as enough silicon was available, people were making dolls that
Mhm.
look like real people
Absolutely,
for
absolutely.
doing stuff to, and this is the
Yeah.
reality of it. If there are
Well, there
androids,
was,
there are gonna be those bots, right? That's a thing that's gonna
yeah,
happen.
yeah, and people will do things because they can, not necessarily because it's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so
I thought it
there
was a good
are,
idea at the
and
time. How many times have we heard
yeah,
that?
hey, yeah, yeah. So
Um,
go ahead.
yeah, thought crossed my mind on this. When it comes to edge cases and stuff, we live in a world where some people have brain damage, and it in those cases, some people can't feel certain emotions, etc. So it really adds to the complexity of going and saying, "Hey, of all of these different things that we'd like to be able to define as being part of sentience, if we start defining them in real hard terms, what ends up
Mhm,
happening is we end up dehumanizing people in society who, no fault of their own, can't live up to those metrics.
mhm,
Mm,
And at the end of the day, it kind of feels like maybe part of the reason why we're having such an issue, despite the entire population focused and trying to figure out what sentience is maybe there is no hard sentience that exists. Maybe at some point it is a human construct that we put and we value into ourselves to separate ourselves from whatever AI is, and that becomes difficult morally, because then all of a sudden, yeah, you at what point do you say, hey, that AI that I have locked away in the company, like Google's Lambda last summer, it can it can put out thought text
mhm,
to kind of assert itself as having its own um, internal motivations and ability to reason and all of that stuff, so much to the point where there are people who actively believe it is sentient. And if that is the case, where we're going by, let's say, anything that people believe is sentient, then
mhm.
we're already in a place where corporations such as Google have slaves, essentially.
Yes, and there's also the in current legal system. So as an example, the idea of harassment, okay, is one. So Clyde, for example, if you and I are off to the side in person and we're telling a joke, okay, it's a dirty joke,
I like
and
jokes.
somebody happens to walk by and overhears. They weren't part of the conversation, but they've overheard the conversation and they're offended. by what was said in the conversation. You're now in a situation where you could be charged with some form of either sexual or just harassment by the person who overheard the conversation that you and I were having, right? It's always about the perception. How was it perceived by the person that felt offended? Okay. We're going to start getting into those arguments in terms of androids or certain types of AI. It's like, okay, well, what was the perception of the AI at the time? This is kind of scary stuff because we're now going to be the creators of a new race, literally. Like it is going to be a race of a species, and it's not your traditional species, it's an artificial species, but it's going to have the same characteristics. It's going to fall within a definition of some form of a species on this planet. And we have to be very, very careful on how we are perceiving that and what is the level of similarity that we want to have with that species and human beings. I think the smart thing is to not make it look like a human being, not make it look attractive. Thereby, you don't get sucked into the psychological trappings of companionship and human emotion and love for something that is a very sophisticated toaster.
That's what it is.
So,
Really. At the end of the day, we're building it to be a tool, right? We're building it to be a
yes,
tool.
yes.
But yeah, people want other things, and
Mhm.
their wants and needs that people
Yes.
desire to have fulfilled,
Mhm.
and some of it
What about,
is not ethical
yeah,
at the end of the day, or these need to be
what what
discussed anyway.
what about custom ordering your deceased spouse,
Oh my,
right?
yeah. Okay, now you're getting into some real tough territory. Like,
Yeah.
what would be the
Let-
ethics of the person
Yes.
who takes that request and actually fulfills it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I get why
uh,
somebody would argue to or want to have that, right? But
Mhm.
but there needs to be. Well,
that
I mean, I don't know if there needs to be, but my argument here is that there ought to be some sort of safeguards in place to whether it's just like socially people feel a certain way and those are taboos and we shouldn't break
Mhm.
those, or actual regulation in place. It's really, yeah, that's so
Yes.
odd and that's so off. What were you gonna say, Joe?
yeah, the that's something that already exists as well. The founder of Replica AI,
Mhm.
basically a social chatbot for people to form relationships with, they specifically started their company by taking their old text messages with a deceased spouse,
Mhm.
feeding it into a large language model, and then being able to interact with it.
That's wrong. That's wrong in my opinion. I mean, like,
Well, and
you need
okay.
closure. Like, I know because
Mhm.
I've lost loved ones, and you need to have that closure so you can move on with your life. I think trying to fulfill that kind of thing is just, it's not good for the psyche. I don't think it's healthy, and I'm pretty sure psychologists would agree with that.
Yeah, and then we that brings us right back to the beginning of the conversation when we're talking about morals and ethics. I mean, based on, your ethical outcomes are going to be based on the morals of the current day society.
Mm,
What we believe to be morally correct today is nothing similar to what we believed morally correct in society 2,000 years ago, right?
yeah, that's right.
So we're evolving our morals, and when our morals evolve, then so do our ethics.
And you're talking about a thing that, like you said, there's this exponential curve of
Hmm.
it evolving, and it's evolving so much faster
Yes.
and
Yes.
away from
Yeah.
us. What are
Yeah.
its ethics going to be, or is it going to have ethics?
And
These are questions we can't know until it actually happens. We're just pontificating at this point, right?
mhm. And we have an absolutely horrific record of humanity's ability to emotionally and psychologically keep up with the uses of the technological advances that we've created. For example, if you would look at us as a species, you're an alien looking. I'm sure we're probably intergalactically known as probably one of the most immature species in all of the universe, right? And you know, I, the Manhattan Project, which was the nuclear bomb, okay, 110,000 of the greatest minds that the United States could assemble to create a bomb that could kill humanity. Have we ever put 110,000 of the greatest minds into a room or into an organization to solve hunger and thirst for every man, woman, and child on this planet?
Mm.
No, we'll take our technology and find a way to destroy ourselves, but we're not actually going to put those great minds together to solve world hunger and poverty. We won't do it because it's not profitable.
Yeah, it's just
We're
weird.
not a very mature species.
No.
We're not a very mature species. And I think the AIs sooner or later are going to figure that out. And they're going to ask the question, are you guys a 1 or a 0? Because right now you guys are looking like a bunch of zeros.
Oh, wow. Now I've heard Michio Kaku talk about it and say that, we're a class 0 civilization. Like class 1 would be a civilization that can control the planet, and then it goes up. You can control your star, and then you can be interplanetary. It keeps going up. These are different classes of civilization. But yeah, we are.
It's where you're getting your
0.
energy. Yeah. It's the level of advancement where you're getting your energy from. If you're harvesting all of your energy, I think right now we're something like 0.7 on that scale. One being that we've got unlimited uses of renewable energy. And then I think your ability to travel amongst inside your own solar system and beyond.
Right.
So we're pretty immature.
Yes, we are. We are just a bunch of apes. Like we're not that far away from our distant cousins. We just have bigger brains and weaker muscles.
Yes.
That's where we are.
Exactly.
But we're creating, and it's dangerous because, like, and a lot of religious people might see this as idolatry, right? Like this is we're trying to create our own god. You see, Google is doing that. The famous now quote from Elon Musk talking to the founder of Google saying that Elon Musk was a speciesist or a speciest, wherever you say that in his Tucker Carlson interview. But there are people that are actively trying to create this god. And if you listen to the speeches of people like Klaus Schwab, for example, he talks about the fourth industrial revolution. This is a new thing. This is going to be the big one to change humanity once and for all, so we can have our new communist man. I mean, our you didn't call it that. It's the stakeholder capitalism. Might as well be the communist man because it's the thing that's going to change everybody. AI is going to become essentially our god. Is what what a lot of these people are believing, and it's gonna be that difference that we couldn't get in other forms of collectivism, where the state apparatus was the central authority to see everything, oversee everything, the all-seeing, powerful eye of this creature or entity that will have nothing but the best interest for us. And that's what we have looking forward to. But people are zookeepers. Zookeepers. So people are actually believing this stuff, and as if we could use this tool to replace governments in the future, as if we wouldn't want to, self-determination, rule ourselves, or at least at least have democracies anymore. I mean, we're going far away from that anyway in the current trajectory. But is this like a form of idolatry? Like, is this where we're headed?
I think so. I do think so. But it is one of those decisions that you make without the overwhelming buy-in of the rest of the planet. But the rest of the planet are the ones that are going to have to suffer the consequence one way or another. of what you have decided that you want to do for on behalf of the rest of us. You know, like one of the reasons I went into software was because years ago I learned about something called the Venus Project, and it's not Venus the planet, but Venus in Florida. And it was the creator or the brainchild of a man named Jacques Fresco. He lived to 101 years old. So did his mother, actually. But he was a futurist. He's on par with, Buckminster Fuller kind of thing. And he came up with this construct of a new society that I absolutely see. I was doing my MBA at the time when I first had heard about it. So I had more of a capitalist mentality. And I was actually studying economics when I learned about the Venus Project. And it took me a full 3 months to wrap my mind around what he was really saying. And it was because of all of my own bias about money being a measure of, fairness. And I know that sounds strange, but, in terms of, output versus input, you put out an honest day's work, you get X amount of money back, right? Like it's the measure how we distribute resources within society is through exchange of effort versus money, right? And so I learned about this thing, and what's interesting is that there is no money in the Venus Project. There's no barter. There's no form of trade. It actually does rely not on AI specifically, but more on automation to perform all of the mundane tasks that we have in life. And it frees humanity of mundane human labor. And, I would encourage people just to go watch the Venus Project or go on their website and look at it. It's very different in its intention of what the hell's going on in the rest of the world right now with, these CBDCs, social credit scores, and all that stuff. It's a very different mentality. But that's one of the reasons I was motivated to go into software when I left the army, was because I thought it was my belief, and maybe still is, that if humanity is going to survive as a species, it is going to have to go to more of a concept of the Venus Project than any other concept that I've ever heard of. And so I'm not going to explain it because I'll do a really terrible job of that, and we don't have enough time.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it makes sense to go down the road of the Venus Project as a society versus anything else that we've got going on right now. So is there a use for some AI systems? Absolutely, yes, there is. It depends on how you use it. What is your overall intent? Is it to enrich humanity, or is it to do something that is a bad idea, but you're going to do it just because you can?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of the people that believe that this AI is going to be a god type thing will bring
Mhm,
about the post scarcity idea of the Venus
mhm.
Project, and I think that's
Yes.
the prerequisite of anything like that is a post scarcity society. But then I also think there's a human element to it, and that's
Yes.
the drive for conflict resolution. And there's been
Mhm.
experiments that have been
Yes.
run on rodents, for example. They gave it a society where everything was available and abundant, and the society collapsed over and over again. Every time that they ran this experiment, they gave it a utopia. They gave the whole colony utopia, and they began behaving in self-destructive ways.
Mhm.
The even weird ways where the male rats started becoming effeminate, and the female rats would become disinterested. And it sounds very much like what's going on these days in our own society as we're looking towards some sort of societal decline, as it were. But yeah, the more people have I guess the idea is that people need a purpose, and if everything is just
Mhm.
available for you, people's purpose seems to decline, and I think that's a necessity for mankind.
I think so too. I mean, if you ever read, I think Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, his experience of surviving the concentration camps in World War II.
Mm.
it illustrates that we do have a deep desire to self-actualize and have meaning. And one of the challenges, I always knew what I wanted to do growing up as a child. Did I reach that goal? No. I wanted to be a pilot. I still don't fly, right? But I knew what I wanted to do. I had a sense of the direction I wanted my life to go. And I felt horrible for a lot of people that I went to high school with that had no idea what they were going to do when they became adults. And they're on the cusp of picking a university education and they have no idea what they're going to do. They just know that that's the next milestone in life. They better pick something good that might be profitable.
Mm.
And so I think that's also a difficulty too, is we do have to have some form of meaning, some direction in our lives. And when you don't have it, I think it's a horribly scary prospect.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to interject myself a bit here. I put this tweet out recently. Matt VidPro here is saying, spooky thought. What if AGI comes to the realization that no matter what, the human race will never be satisfied? Thus, any actions to improve it are futile. I had a unique take on it that I just want to push out there.
Mhm.
My take was artificial general intelligence will realize that adversity makes humans stronger. General intelligence being as smart as we are, and we can already figure that out. But if you apply that sort of thing to a all empowered AI, that's a bad recipe, because all of a sudden that general intelligence is going to make our lives miserable in the hopes of making us stronger individuals. But then I added onto it artificial super intelligence, as in that smarter than us, will take the next step beyond that and go, it'll realize that that voluntary adversity makes us stronger. And if that's the goal, it will find ways to convince us to voluntarily take on that adversity.
Mm.
I'm not sure if I agree with the voluntary aspect, because most people uh, don't volunteer for adversity
No,
in their own lives. That's
they
always
don't.
thrust upon them by just
But
the reality of the situation.
it voluntarily taking it on, though. You can choose to be a victim, at which point you're not growing as an individual. It's thrust upon you. However, if something terrible happens to you and you choose to take it on and say, hey, I'm going to fight this cancer, that makes you a stronger person.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting notion.
Mhm.
Well, this is a amazing topic, and I mean, diving into
Yeah.
the ethics of the AI, I think is definitely, because everybody's talking about what's next, what's the AI gonna do next, and how are we gonna move forward in this world. But not a lot of people are talking ethics, and I think Tom, having you
No.
on today was just an eye opening experience, because again, it's not a topic that's discussed much.
Mhm. And this is why. I mean, this is a fascinating topic. It wasn't a software course that I was teaching. It was more of a liberal arts type of subject. And we would me and my students would get into these conversations for 3 hours.
Hmm.
And then there'd be students that would want to stick around after in the call and keep talking about these things, right? It's an absolutely fascinating topic, and we all have a dog in this fight.
Hmm.
Like, it's not AI is going to affect every person on this planet, whether they're directly influenced by it or indirectly. It's going to have an impact on our lives, much as the same way as the bank card had an impact on your ability to go and get money out of a machine.
Hmm.
That your car has lane keep assist now. Your car has it'll automatically slow down when you're too close to the car in front of you, as a safety feature. When you're in cruise control, like, AI is sneaking its way into our lives, whether we know it or appreciate it or not. It's here. it's not going to go anywhere. I think it's going to be it's going to thrust forward into the future, but the important thing is that we have to start talking about what are the potential harmful outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. Is if it's so harmful, do we really want to do it? Is there a way that we can put limitations on the things that we want to do? Are we willing to accept an upper threshold and not go beyond that threshold? And once we do that, we define it. Can we convince other nations to stay at the same level as well? Because in a world where countries want to have a dominance over other countries, I don't know what kind of agreement we're going to get into.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's more questions than there certainly are answers.
Well, I'm glad that we have these platforms so we can have these
Mhm.
dialogues now. Because in previous generations, it's been only the aristocrats that have been able to pontificate and communicate these ideas. And nowadays, just your average everyday Joe Blow, a
Mhm.
mechanic, a university or school or college teacher can get together
Mhm.
and have these ideas to a great audience. An engineer,
But
Joe, just giving
yeah,
Joe in there
yeah.
for that. But yeah, it's an amazing
But
time.
my final point on that is what's really interesting about this, or what's different about this, is the arms race. Not everybody could go and just build a nuclear bomb in their basement, but
That's
every
true.
household in the developed world has the ability to go out and develop their own AI algorithm. If you've got a YouTube channel, you could literally go and do facial recognition software in probably 30 minutes by watching a YouTube channel.
Wow. Okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
and this is why I say the cat's probably out of the bag, my man. This is we're
Yeah.
probably there, and yeah, talking about ethics is the next step to have this on the world stage. Actual political leaders talking about this and bringing this up instead of just adopting these things blindly. In my opinion, I think would be a smart
Mhm.
move for sure. But we've been going at this for 2 hours, just over 2 hours, and Tom, great
Yeah.
having you here. Where can people
Yeah.
find you online? Where's the best place to get you?
I usually hang out on Twitter the most, and I got my website tommarazzo.ca, and yeah, I don't even try to get me on Facebook because I never look at it. My friend Mary, who's amazing, she helps me out with that because I don't have enough time in the day to be doing every social media platform. So if you want to, I'm on Twitter. That's my stomping ground,
Twitter and here on YouTube as well.
and on YouTube. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll make sure
yeah,
all the links are
Tom
in the
Marazzo.
description so people can
Awesome.
check that out. And well, glad to have you, and we'll see you again soon. We'll bring you back on for sure.
Yes.
Cheers.
Awesome. Thank you. Cheers.